So, over to you for 6 minutes, sir.
Mr. Bashir, how many times did you meet with Christian Firth of GC Strategies?
Thank you for the question. Just to clarify, are you referring to my current job at KPMG or previously in the federal government, or both?
Ever.
Ever. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. I'll separate the answer into two different answers. So in the federal government, I did meet with Mr. Firth 2 to 3 times at most. Generally to discuss, like I met with several vendors to discuss some offerings that he had in the security space. I met with him once virtually while at KPMG.
In your, excuse me, in your meetings with him, can you say where they happened? Did they happen in your office, in an office tower here in the NCR, or did they happen at a private residence, at a restaurant? Where were they?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the KPMG meeting, as I mentioned, the one was virtual. The 2 to 3 at most, when I was at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, all occurred in the lobby of 90 Elgin, which is the Treasury Board government building.
And so these meetings were just one-on-ones?
That's correct.
Including your meeting, the virtual meeting when you worked at KPMG. It was just you and Mr. Firth.
That is correct, yeah.
And could you quickly give a breakdown of what the topics were that were discussed in your meeting while you were a public servant, and likewise when you worked at KPMG?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I should say all my answers subsequently will be directed to the chair. Sorry about that. So while in the federal public service, Christian Firth, like I said, many vendors reach out from time to time to explain what type of security products or services they may be offering. Given my role at the time was a Director General of Cybersecurity. In the specific meetings with Mr. Firth, I remember discussing 2 products related to, and you have to refresh. I'm sorry, I apologize for the lack of detail, but I remember something around secure communications and digital identity. But no subsequent meetings afterwards. He kind of left with a brochure, a pamphlet, so to speak, and that was the end of that. And the KPMG meeting specifically was more of essentially a reintroduction, I suppose. He had apparently been talking to one of my colleagues prior. I was looped into an email thread. It was apparent that the subject of cybersecurity came up, and then I subsequently discussed with Mr. Firth the types of cybersecurity services that KPMG.
Colleague?
Sorry?
Who was the colleague that you referenced?
It's a retired partner who's no longer with the firm.
Okay. And did Antonio Utano, who's a senior official at the Canada Border Service Agency, direct KPMG to work with Christian Firth and GC Strategies?
Thank you for the question. So upon submitting, after we submitted a proposal to Mr. Utano, and I did have a meeting, and it was at that meeting he did say, can you also submit this proposal through to GC Strategies? My understanding was that Mr. Utano was exploring his procurement options. I believe his procurement team had likely given him some advice on what was the quickest way to procure. I understand there was some urgency due to the cybersecurity nature of the work in question.
Well, I'm sure it did make the procurement process easier because it skips the procurement process. Did it have anything to do with ease of contracting and cash flow? Was that one of the reasons?
Thank you for the question. I think hard to speculate. It's probably a question better directed for the CBSA, to be honest.
What did Mr. Otano tell you about GC Strategies? Had you worked with Antonio Otano prior to this ArriveCAN engagement?
Thanks for the question. I'd never worked with Mr. Utano prior to the engagement. I likely crossed paths with him in my time in government, at a government event, but I don't recall ever working with him on anything. And sorry, to answer the first part of your question, the way it came up was we discussed the proposal. He seemed happy with what he saw and suggested that I pass that along to Mr. Firth afterwards.
Did this seem normal to you that you'd be directed to submit a proposal to a subcontractor when you were submitting a proposal directly to the federal government? Is that the normal way that you do business?
Thanks for the question. The way I looked at it at the time was, and the way I characterized procurement is there's essentially 3 steps to it. Like step 1 is to identify what it is you want to procure. Second step, identify the vehicle by which you would procure it. And third is to procure it. And having first completed that first step of establishing what it is that you wanted to procure, my understanding was that Mr. Utano was simply exploring the options that he had. And one of the other options he had was that SEPS vehicle that my colleague Lydia discussed last time. And as my other colleague Hartaj mentioned, we would have happily competed for it had he wanted to put it out to a full tender as well.
Right. So, as someone who previously worked for the public service and as a taxpayer, do you find it strange that the government of Canada asked a company the size of KPMG, 11,000 employees, I think you said in your opening, to subcontract through two guys who are obviously taking a percentage of the total contract amount? So KPMG says, well, this is how much it's going to cost us to do it, and we know that they were adding up to 30% on top of that. Does that seem like would you advise clients to follow that method, or would you advise them to procure the services directly from the vendor?
Thank you for the question. Obviously, we would prefer, direct procurement where possible, for sure. I can't begin to speculate on the reasons CBSA may have wanted to go that particular route.
Any other instances where this type of direction was given to KPMG or another company to, instead of offering their services directly to the government, to CBSA, to work through GC Strategies or another third party?
Thank you for the question. To my knowledge, no, but I do know KPMG as a firm, and I believe we submitted this in writing as well, has subcontracted for, and don't quote me on this, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was 13 different companies of varying sizes, from very large organizations to small. I think the key there is where we can help provide expertise, specifically to the government in areas that we are good at and could provide value for taxpayers. I think we would entertain that, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Just a word of, I think it's obvious, you are being quoted here. If you discover after the fact that information is a little off, do let us go, because this is a Parliament House Commons committee. So I appreciate your turn of phrase. Don't quote me on it, but you are being quoted for the official record here. So, but I take it. I take that and take that in the spirit it was given in your comment as well. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'll start by outlining the role of the Public Accounts Committee. It is to hold to account how tax dollars are spent across the country, for what purposes, and whether or not they were justifiable within the reports of the Auditor General and how departments have functioned. And I know that things become very politicized as it progresses, and ArriveCAN is one of those apps. I am not questioning the quality of the app, although in the Auditor General's report there were some challenges. What I am questioning today from all of you is how these dollars, which we can't really get to the bottom of, how they were spent. And I think we owe it to Canadians to ensure that we really understand and ultimately improve the process as to how contracting happens, how the Lobbying Act and the Conflict of Interest Code are able to ensure that there is accountability as to how tax dollars are spent. So perhaps I'll start with Mr. Bashir, if that's okay. You have worked in various different departments within the federal government, and now you are working for KPMG. Can you maybe help us outline how the Lobbying Act applied to you, how the Conflict of Interest Code has applied to you in your new role, having all of the experience that you have within the bureaucracy of government, and having built a network of relationships as well?
Thank you for the question. Given the position that I held in the federal public service, I was subject to the Treasury Board directive on conflict of interest. As are most, I believe they term that positions designated at risk for conflict or high risk for conflict of interest. So in what that directive states, and this is the process that I followed upon my departure, is that upon receipt of an offer of employment, and I should say that I did this way earlier than having the offer of employment. I started when I even began thinking about getting an opportunity. I engaged with my values and ethics team immediately, who coached me through the entire process. That then involves a discussion with the senior management team, and finally culminates in a formal letter from the deputy head outlining post-employment restrictions, or as some term it, a cool-off period upon the departure from the public service. So in my particular case, I was given what was a 1-year post-employment restriction that forbid me from soliciting work or being named even on a request for proposal response for the core federal public service. I have that letter. I took that letter to KPMG upon my start date there, and we established the appropriate protocols and ethical walls to ensure that I was completely removed from the federal practice for the entirety of that first year, at which time I worked on other things like provincial governments and municipal and other contracts at that time.
I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that. And do you feel that that those checks and balances were sufficient? I mean, when we, in a place like this, you make friends, you make connections. How can the Lobbying Act or the Conflict of Interest Code be more efficient in ensuring that there is no undue access or no undue profit made on taxpayers' dimes based on relationships that have been, going on for decades?
Thank you for the question. It's a challenging one for sure. I think the directive does a very good job outlining the requirements that are required from all parties, but both the person in question and the organizations that need to subsequently follow that. I can't really comment on the oversight of that, as I've never been involved on the other side. But I do say it's incumbent upon all parties involved, both the departing organization, the new organization, and the person involved to ensure continuous compliance with these requirements.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Bashir. Mr. Bernard, I'm going to turn to you next. How did Donnacona and Tech Systems become engaged with the government on the development of ArriveCAN?
I'm sorry, you asking me how Tech Systems?
How did Donnacona become engaged with the government on ArriveCAN, on the app?
Yeah. I'll
Yes,
defer
please.
to-
Thank you.
So we won actually 3 competitively produced RFPs for CBSA. So we were providing resources, and then we didn't have nothing in our contract or the task authorizations mentioned ArriveCAN. So we had a number of IT professionals, typically cloud people, who were working on it, and what they were doing was they were essentially building. Lack of a better term, containers on the AWS cloud to bring in data. So they brought in some data, as John had mentioned, from public health, but also other applications too. So they're building this infrastructure on the cloud to accept data from different sources. So we went through our timesheets when the AG report came out to see, because we didn't have anything that said ArriveCAN, and we looked through the activities, and that's how
I'm
we
so
found
sorry.
it.
I'm going to stop you there. My question specifically is when the proposal came out and the discussions were ongoing about developing this app, did you have conversations with any ministers or the Prime Minister or any political figures or any bureaucrats during this whole process?
We won the competitively the RFPs, and CBSA contacted for an as and when. Yeah.
I'll even add that I was quite surprised to see my company's name listed in the AG report.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés. If you don't speak
No, Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés.
earpiece in, because pour le moment, nous sommes au Québec. Voilà. Madame.
Now we are in Quebec. Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés. We're in a neighboring country. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Bashir, for you. You went to KPMG as a partner, or have you became a partner later?
I joined as a direct admit partner.
Quand est-ce que vous êtes devenu associé?
When did you become a partner?
Thank you for the question. If I understood right, when I joined as a direct admit partner in May of 2020 when I joined the firm.
Vous venez de dire que vous étiez rentré comme directeur.
But you said you came in as a director. Okay. You were an associate, as a partner, and when you arrived, the first thing you had to do, which is quite normal, is to undertake some training on conformity and your role.
It cut out a bit at the end. Thank you for the question. I understand. Are you asking about the training I took for risk?
Risque et conformité, toutes les formations que
And risk and all the training that to follow the rules of the organization you are starting with.
The question and clarification. That is correct. Upon joining the firm and subsequently on a regular basis, we continually take risk, independence, security, privacy, all the training.
Parfait. Donc, c'est une raison, si vous avez...
And if you followed that, if you did that training, I find it strange that you didn't raise the problem of Mr. Otano, who is asking you to go through GC strategies rather than making your contract and doing your work directly with Border Services, knowing that you are already a pre-authorized service provider for Border Services. I find strange that in your presentation you said that you don't know why Border Services wanted you to go through GC strategies, and I think it's pretty obvious. And if not, maybe you should go back to your training on appropriateness. And if you know that at the time, wouldn't that have raised red flags for you? Because since you had a contract with you could have had a contract with the Border Services, yet you were asked to go via GC strategies. Why didn't that raise a red flag for you?
Thank you for the question. So just one point of clarification before I answer the question is that we did not have a direct procurement vehicle with the CBSA at the time. I believe what I referred to earlier was the CEPS vehicle. That was more of a government-wide vehicle, but nothing direct with the CBSA at that particular time. With respect to the training, we fully followed every single process that the training indicates, which includes rigorous risk management processes that check each party that we're engaged with, which in this particular case, we had to list GC strategies, we had to list CBSA, and subsequently go through a three-partner approval process to ensure that we were able to proceed with the engagement. At that point in time, no flags were raised, and as such, we proceeded accordingly.
Mais vous êtes en train de me dire que vous trouvez...
But you're telling me that you find it normal that you would do work on a file that was already something you were pre-authorized as a supplier for the government, and so it's easier for you to get a contract, and he found it was better to go through this other side process.
Thank you for the question. The procurement method is chosen by the government department at the end of the day, and it's we can't question the government's direction on how to procure a service for them.
C'est faux. Excusez-moi, mais c'est faux. C'est ce que...
No, I don't think that's right. That's what we heard about the red flags. The Auditor General said that the behaviors that you witnessed that should have raised red flags. So you're saying that your consultants from Montreal were perhaps more aware of the problems of this process of going through a subcontractor, like GC strategies, and that this is an issue that you think is quite normal, but from your own company, there were those that said that it wasn't a normal way to proceed, and so it's clear that there's a clear conflict of interest, and that's why Mr. Otano asked you to go through GC strategies. But yet, for you, there was nothing unusual. But in the light of the right of the Auditor General's report, you should have seen that there was a problem. It should have raised a red flag, and this process was not a normal one.
I didn't get a question there, but I guess what I would simply say is, we follow the process we had in place, and I'd also like to add that the Government of Canada had vetted GC strategies, I believe, 100+ times as they were awarded a number of contracts in the last number of years, as this committee has discussed. And when you couple our processes with the fact that the Government of Canada itself had validated and revalidated the legitimacy of GC strategies, that information led us to believe that this was a reasonable path forward to procure.
Mais en plus, vous connaissiez GC stratégies. Vous saviez que c'était...
And yet you were familiar with GC strategies that only had two individuals in it, and yet the only justification for using GC strategies was to find resources. So if the government had, if there had already been resources, you know that you'd already met with Christian Firth. And I'm going to ask the same question. Why was there no red flag for you when this was clearly an unusual process?
Thanks for the question. I just refer you to the previous response of we went through our processes and trusted the government went through theirs as well.
Thank you very much. Next is Mr. Desjardins joining us virtually. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll begin with KPMG. Mr. Bashir, when did you start work with the Government of Canada?
Thanks for the question. Sorry, just again to clarify, starting work while at KPMG or starting as a public servant, if you can please clarify.
As a public servant. You yourself, Mr. Bashir, when did you start working with the Government of Canada? Date?
Thank you for the question. My start date was October of 2009 as a full-time employee.
And what role did you play prior to your departure?
Thank you for the question. Immediately prior to my departure to KPMG, I was the Director General of Cybersecurity and Digital Identity at the Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat.
Throughout your time from 2009 to that point, would you say you had a good understanding of Canada's procurement system?
Thank you for the question. I think I had a decent understanding for sure. Me myself, I'd led a handful of procurement processes, but not of a large number, if that's what the question is.
But were you familiar with the process, not so much the number, but the process to which a private firm in particular could apply to the government's procurement system?
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, I'm familiar with the procurement process for sure.
And what was the last procurement process you undertook prior to your departure?
Thank you for the question. You're taking me back a little bit. I'm going to guesstimate somewhere in the 2018 range.
Okay. And then your departure from the government is what date?
I had departed the public service in May of 2020.
In May of 2020, a lot was going on, of course. We had a national and global pandemic. It seems to me that it could have been the perspective of KPMG at the time to scout this kind of talent. Did they find you?
Thanks for the question. At the time, I was discussing post-government employment with a number of different organizations. I don't actually recall who emailed who for. I think it was kind of mutual. I think we had some mutual. People know people in the city, and you kind of sit down and say, "Hey, would you be interested?" It was one of those types of conversations to get it started.
Interesting. That is something the Auditor General warned us about. What could be evident in this is these sit-downs, these gatherings, this community. And from prior witnesses, we heard about these kind of community meetings. Were any of these community meetings you had with large firms like KPMG and perhaps others ever at a restaurant or a club or in a private venue outside of government precincts?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely not. No, I'm very well aware of the Directive of Conflict of Interest and the restrictions around hospitality and gifts.
And where did these meetings happen? Where did KPMG meet you?
There were phone calls, to be honest, to start everything off. I started off with phone calls and emails. And ultimately...
Sure, you submitted that there was a community, and I highly doubt that it was only a phone call. You do understand that this information is extremely pertinent to our investigation here. To understand this claim of the Auditor General, which I believe is worth our investigation, is to where and why and who met with you or other persons. And so I'll give you one more opportunity. Was there ever an instance where you were invited to outside work dinners, receive gifts or favors of any kind?
The answer is no to that question.
Thank you very much. In relation to Mr. Anthony Utano, did he direct you to work with GC Strategies?
Thank you for the question. So, as I mentioned earlier, when meeting with Mr. Utano after submitting the proposal, what he directed was for me to submit a copy of that proposal to Mr. Firth at GC Strategies, which I did.
And did you bring up any questions to Mr. Utano as to why you would do such a thing?
Thanks for the question. At that meeting, we discussed the number of procurement options Mr. Utano had at his disposal, which I think I mentioned could have included the SEPS vehicle, an open RFP from scratch, or using one of his existing vehicles, and all options were discussed, so nothing stood out from that conversation.
Well, what stood out to me and what I'm starting to understand is in that conversation, there's a legitimate claim that you were directed by Mr. Utano to work with GC Strategies at the time of the procurement decision. GC Strategies and who they were and what they didn't get brought up in that meeting at all. The particular fact of them being a two-person company that did no work at all. Did that ever come up?
Thank you for the question. No, the number of employees of GC Strategies, nor the work that were doing at the time with the CBSA was not discussed. What was only discussed was that they had existing procurement vehicles that were set already with the CBSA.
Do you believe that's a red flag to not question who GC Strategies was, their capacity, or their ability to deliver work?
Thank you for the question. So that's where I lean on our risk management processes that I discussed earlier to find out if red flags occurred. So what we do is we take the information back and we submit that information through that process to validate no red flags came up. And as I mentioned earlier, the Government of Canada themselves had awarded, not just the CBSA, many other departments had awarded this same company numerous contracts, which further validates our decision.
So you're saying you went through all the processes, you and Mr. Utano and everyone in the room went through all of the regular procurement processes, including a red flag assessment that, which is what you just described, and no one flagged that this two-person company that does no work was a problem.
Thanks for the question. I can't speak to the processes that Mr. Utano went through, but certainly I can speak to our processes, and yes, I that is the result of our process.
Do you see that as a critical failure?
Thanks for the question. At the time, and keep in mind that the processes are a point in time. At that point in time, that's the information that arose. I suspect if run today, the result would be different.
Thank you very much. That is the end of the first round. Beginning the next, Mr. Genuous, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bernard, the Auditor General, based on federal government records, believed that your company did $3 million worth of work on ArriveCAN. You said that the work was about $500,000. This points to something we know is a big problem: shoddy and impenetrable records. In some cases, we've also dealt with deletion of records, questions, or records not kept. Do you have any reflections on how the government records that the Auditor General consulted could have been so off the mark compared to your own assessments?
I do, but I'll defer that to my partner because we spoke about this prior to him.
So as I mentioned, you said about 500,000, and I think in the AG report they talked about there was some internal financial coding that was unsure. So we would submit timesheets with deliverables, and then what happened after that, we don't really know. And they would have put whatever coding they had against it. So other than that, we're kind of at a loss as to what happens after we submit timesheets, right?
So you submit timesheets. There's internal financial coding that apparently is inconsistent with the timesheets you've submitted, or is unreadable to someone looking at it.
We don't see the internal coding.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But suggest that there's something very dramatic lost in translation, because that's an order of magnitude six times. At the Government Operations Committee, we're looking at Indigenous procurement and planning some further study on it. Mr. Bernard, you've told us a story about growing up on reserve, starting a successful business that employs Indigenous people, and investing back in your community. Based on what we know from your testimony, that seems precisely like the kind of outcomes that Indigenous procurement policies are meant to support. But we also know now clearly that there are instances of abuse as well. Tiny companies that become qualified as Indigenous, but who subcontract the actual work to non-Indigenous firms and do not provide benefit back to Indigenous communities. You were quoted in the Globe and Mail saying that you tried for years to advise the government on how it could refine its Indigenous set-aside contracting policies. Sir, what is your advice? How can the current problems, the use of the Dalian model, for instance, be fixed to achieve the kind of outcomes that the program is supposed to aim for?
Well, it's actually on record. In 2006, I sat in front of a Senate committee on Aboriginal procurement. And back in 2006, I warned of the potential abuse of joint ventures. And to this day, 18 years later, we are seeing the results of that. Basically, I was using terms like Aboriginal companies need to learn how to walk before they run. Yet, amazingly, Don Connor's been in business 28 years, and we find ourselves up against Aboriginal firms that were running. They just got into business and they're running multi-million-dollar contracts. I guess what I'm trying to say is being an Aboriginal is not a skill, but yet in the Aboriginal procurement with joint ventures, it almost like if you're Aboriginal, all of a sudden that's the quality you're bringing to the joint venture, and we just don't agree with that. We feel that, I mean, obviously you have to start somewhere, so there should be small, but we believe the Aboriginal side of a joint venture, it should progress. They shouldn't be going after a $100 million contract when they were riding an ice cream truck the week before. And so this is my if you go back to the 2006 testimony, which is on record and on the Senate committees, in there I actually give 3 ways that I think that should be addressed. And the first one is most importantly, it's a joint venture. That's where there's really a lot of room for abuse. Unfortunately, there's no motivation for Aboriginal companies to grow, because if you can become a joint venture and you don't have to do nothing, you don't even have to you don't even need a staff or admin staff, because your joint venture partner has all that. So.
Earlier testimony, because I suspect you could talk for a long time on this, and we'll have to maybe have you back. But that seems exactly what happened with Dalian and Carodex, right? Carodex is a larger non-Indigenous company. Dalian is an Indigenous company with 2 people that receives contracts and subcontracts. They're in joint venture, which fulfills a procurement requirement. Also on the issue of subcontractors, you mentioned that your company has subcontractors. There's supposed to be a requirement for Indigenous subcontractors as part of Indigenous procurement, but there seems to be no tracking or enforcement of that whatsoever. What is your experience with Indigenous subcontractors, and is the government asking you questions about that? Are you providing data on that at all?
No, and let's face it, there's not enough Indigenous people to meet some of these contracts. So calling yourself an Aboriginal company or Indigenous company, I don't, just because I own 100% and I'm status Indian, I don't believe that that's what I should be Aboriginal benefits. It's not what we do. When people ask me, well, you're an Aboriginal company, what does that mean? Do you stand on one leg and, no, we do business just like everybody else. And me calling myself an Aboriginal company, it's what we do. And not just in hiring Indigenous people, but in the sponsoring and the supporting and the spinning off other Aboriginals, or as I explained with my community. That to me is the solution. But I'm sorry, but if you're just going to hire Aboriginal people and you think you're going to get 50 Aboriginal people on a 150-person project, that's just not going to happen in this field.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Moving now to Mr. Wheeler. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And just so you know, my last name is pronounced Weiler.
Thank you. But, I appreciate that, Mr. Weiler. That will not happen again. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to be joining this committee for the first time, and to be joining the study. And I will have not had the time that other folks on this committee have had to look into this in detail. But like all Canadians, I've been following the drama as the different layers of this app gets uncovered. And so it's a pleasure to be able to join into this process and looking into this in more detail today. Mr. Bashir, I do want to start with you. And first off, just going back to your experience with the Treasury Board Secretariat, what were the particular roles that you had again?
Thanks for the question. I held a variety of roles. My stint with the Treasury Board started in July of 2011. So I could walk you through the path if you like.
Well, what I'd be most interested in is your relationship with the procurement process while you're at Treasury Board.
Oh, I probably didn't start procuring anything like in a role where I was procuring anything myself till probably 2017 in the role of Director General Cybersecurity.
And you mentioned that you had encountered Mr. Firth several times while you were at the Treasury Board. And could you just describe the nature of those meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I mentioned earlier, Mr. Firth was like every other vendor probably in town who would send an email and try to get a meeting to discuss a product or a service that they had offered. There were two in particular that I think I was discussing earlier, one around secure communications and one around digital identity, both of which were files that fell under my portfolio, and it piqued my interest to hear a bit more. So the nature of the meeting was both just a bit of a debrief on the service or the product that he was offering at the time. As I mentioned, both meetings occurred in the lobby of the building I worked in, which is 90 Elgin, and nothing really followed after that, to be clear.
When you were with these meetings with Mr. Firth and more generally in procurement, was this a common practice that you see, that the types of services that GC Strategies would offer is, getting the contract and subcontracting it from there? Was this a regular practice that you would see?
See, in my role, was a little bit different at the Treasury Board. Like, just for context for the committee, the Treasury Board is more of a policy where I work. Sorry, in the Treasury Board was more of a policy organization, setting policies, standards, directives for the rest of the public service to follow. So we didn't typically procure any goods per se. However, in order to do my job properly and set forth a forward-looking cybersecurity strategy for all of government, it was incumbent upon me to understand, where the industry was heading, how technology was evolving, and so forth. And so that was the general, gist of the interactions with Mr. Firth. So we didn't really discuss subcontracting or any of those things that you asked.
Okay. I want to jump ahead to your current role with KPMG. Could you walk us through the risk management process when KPMG was considering being part of this contract?
Absolutely, and my answer will apply to every contract, that we would take on, any engagement as we call them. So, to start any process, we run checks on the entity itself, the engaging. We call them an engaging party. In this case, the engaging end party is the CBSA. We also have to run KYC, know your customer, know your client type checks on any other intermediary that would be involved. And in this case, that would have been GC Strategies. So both are listed in what's called a client acceptance process. In that process, they vet both the entities individually and then vet the engagement as a whole in consideration of the results of the entity process, if you follow me so far. And so that is a process that involves a series of questions that have to be answered, including, the nature of the work, because, whether or not we audit the companies or not, obviously that would be a red flag for our firm. And other factors. I don't know all the questions off the top of my head, but there are a number of questions. And as I mentioned, it goes through every public sector engagement has a mandatory 3 partners on it. So one, a lead delivery partner, a second, a quality control partner, and third, a client acceptance partner, all vetting that the information has been filled out appropriately.
And through all of this process, there weren't any red flags that were raised?
That is correct. That particular time, no red flags were raised throughout that process.
Has KPMG worked with GC Strategies on any other projects?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. How about with Coradix or Dalian or Coradel?
Not to my knowledge, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my time.
That's very time. Thank you, Mr. Weiler. I appreciate that. Next up, pour 2 minutes, 30 secondes. C'est
2.5 minutes, Ms. Sinclair Desgagneux. Mr. Sheen, I think the process for compliance, knowing that you knew Christian Firth and that you had worked at Veritap when it was accused of wrong, and there should be a red flag. And in 2009, if I'm not wrong, I think that you were an employee. No, not yet. Yes, you, 2009, you were there as an employee. What department were you in?
Services Canada, or I believe it was called something different at the time, INAC.
D'accord. Donc, juste pour vous.
Okay. So just wanted to say that 2009, you didn't know that Mr. Firth was working for ZDAC, who was, at a time, there was an accusation by the Auditor General. I think that that should have been something you would know in talking about procurement. There was an accusation in 2009. Mr. Bernard with Donnacona, there was an inquiry that was suspended, but as far as I know, Donnacona was not exonerated in that case either. Can you, what do you have to say with regard to that, with regard to the accusation with regard to your proposals?
Thank you for the question. I believe you're speaking about the bid rigging.
Trucage d'offres en français.
Yeah, we were accused, and all the accusations were dropped. We never had a day in court to defend ourselves or even to ask for an apology, because it changed my life, being accused of something like this. So, and I have no other information on anybody else that was involved, because I was asked, if you have information, we'll waive you or whatever. I said, well, I have no information because I know nothing about what you're talking about. But we were accused at the very last minute.
D'accord, très bien. Combien d'employés?
How many employees do you have at Donnacona?
You mean today?
Combien d'employés comptez-vous?
How many employees do you have?
84 employees right now, probably about 200 or 300 other resources, subcontractors that work for us.
Très brièvement, s'il vous plaît.
Very briefly. And is that enough in 97 contracts with the federal government and many contracts? And do you have enough to do all this work? Do you have to have a number of subcontractors?
If you're asking if 84 employees and maybe 200-300, yes, that's enough.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup. Next up,
Thank you very much.
Desjardins for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And what we're hearing today several times is how far back these issues of procurement actually are, from as early as at least 2009. Our committee actually received documentation of the cost of these insiders against the better wishes of what I believe could have been the work done by the public service. In the course between January 1st, 2011 and February 16th, 2024, when our committee requested the documents, we found that the government of Canada, through subsequently 2 governments, was able to give 3 companies over $1 billion. And my concern is how in fact can this happen? How can 3 contractors explode in resourcing by these governments, consecutive governments, continuously feeding into these contractors and subcontractors in a big giant web? The Auditor General found, actually, in one of her findings, finding 1.5, for those who know the report, which, quote, multiple amendments were made to those non-competitive professional service contracts. Approximately half of the contract amendments extended the contract beyond the original period, which prevented or delayed opportunities for other subcontractors to complete the work. Ms. Lee, you said that the invoicing was pre-approved by the government and the process never changed when it has been established by the AG that this was a non-competitive contract with a lack of proper financial documents to verify these details. My question, Ms. Lee, is did you have any awareness of how the invoices and task authorization amendments were increasing costs without deliverables to such an extent overall in this project?
Thank you for the member's question. And as I mentioned the last time I was here, a couple things. One is on the invoicing. The very first time that we issued an invoice, and this was against the original SEPS contract, the first TA, we asked for the Public Health Agency to approve the level of information, the details that were described in the invoice to validate that they were getting enough information in order to process the invoice on their side correctly. And they verified that, yes, this was sufficient. And we never changed that whole level of detail in all of our invoices for every contract that we had throughout the COVID-19.
So who added the amendments?
So when we finished, when we got to the end of the SEPS agreement term, the Public Health Agency sponsor at the time said that they wanted to go back to SEPS and ask for the ability to use that vehicle to renew. Our understanding was that PSPC said, no, you can't use that vehicle any longer. I don't know why. So they said, okay, fine, then we will have to renew our agreement with KPMG through a public health agency direct contract.
Thank you.
But why we were not given the information.
Thank you. That is your time. Next up, we have Mr. Brock for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is to Mr. Bashir. Mr. Bashir, did you read the Auditor General's report?
Yes, sir, I did.
There are 3 sections that reference of significance that reference your company, KPMG. I'm just going to read that out into the record. We also found that the Public Health Agency of Canada awarded a professional service task authorization using a non-competitive approach to KPMG. We found no documentation of the initial communications or the reasons why the agency did not consider or select other eligible contractors to carry out the work. We found that 3 contractors, GC Strategies, 49 Solutions, and KPMG, were originally awarded professional services work with an original estimated total value of $4.5 million through non-competitive approaches. Multiple amendments were made to these non-competitive professional service contracts. Approximately half of the contract amendments extended the contract beyond the original period, which prevented or delayed opportunities for other contractors to compete for work. These amendments also resulted in additional costs. We also found that GC Strategies and KPMG were each awarded 2 additional contracts through non-competitive approaches. This further limited the opportunities for other contractors to compete for subsequent work. We found similar issues in the 2 professional services contracts awarded by the PHAC to KPMG. While the first contract included milestones with clear deliverables and pricing, these were later amended and replaced with less specific deliverables to allow for more flexibility. In addition, the agency did not set out specific tasks, levels of effort, and deliverables for these contracts in task authorizations. Mr. Bashir, what I just read out essentially captures the activities of GC Strategies. It highlights, in my opinion, both non-ethical and possibly criminal activities that caused the RCMP to launch an investigation, to ultimately raid the home of Christian Firth of GC Strategies, and to possibly lay at least fraud, if not forgery charges, in addition to other criminal activities. Were you aware of that, sir?
Thank you for the question. I'm aware of what was in the Auditor General's report. So yes, I'm aware that's there.
Were you aware of all of these amendments made? Was the company part of this? Were you engaged in making amendments to this contract, or was it done without the knowledge of KPMG?
Given that it's a PHAC question, I'll pass that over to my colleague Lydia, who worked on that engagement.
Thank you for the member's question. If I can also bring you back to the testimony that I shared the last time I was here. After the original SEPS TAs expired and the Public Health Agency wanted to try and extend KPMG under that contract and were told by PSPC that they could no longer use that vehicle, and we don't know why. KPMG does not know why. KPMG was informed by the Public Health Agency that they were working through with their own internal procurement team a justification and rationale for keeping KPMG on. And as you'll remember, this was at the height of the lockdown of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the subsequent contracts that were awarded to KPMG by Public Health Agency were of the same type of work that we had been doing along the first original SEPS agreement. And
Can I be more specific? Were you actually involved in amending the terms of your own contract?
Thank you for the member's question. We absolutely were not. We were acting under the direction of the Public Health Agency at that time.
So the activities that the Auditor General highlights were done, you're saying, your evidence is, were done without your knowledge and consent. Is that correct?
Thank you for the member's question. We understood that the Public Health Agency wished to keep KPMG extended, but in terms of the inner workings with their local procurement team inside Public Health Agency, we were not involved in any of that.
Has the RCMP contacted KPMG to this date?
Thank you for your question. Regarding the ArriveCAN work that I supported and that Imran did, we are not aware of any RCMP conversations or communications.
In relation to any contracts that involve GC Strategies and Christian Firth, have you been contacted by the RCMP?
No, thank you, and neither of us have been.
Okay, Ms. Lee, I had asked you specifically on the last occasion if you would forward to the committee any and all levels of communication by the CBSA to KPMG to engage with GC Strategies.
Your question, Mr.
I
Brock.
asked for text
Your question,
messages.
Mr. Brock. Mr. Brock, you're out of time. So if you have a question,
I do have a question.
then pose it.
Why haven't you delivered that to the committee?
So thank you very much for the member's question on that. And our understanding was that you wanted to understand the way in which we became, that Imran and our team became introduced to GC Strategies at that time, and we did provide all of that information in our written response.
Thank you very much. Up next is Ms. Shanahan. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today on this topic. But I'm afraid that I have to speak about something as a member here. This is the 19th or the 20th meeting, I believe, that Public Accounts is holding on this topic, because of course we were very much seized with the Auditor General's report regarding the lack of documentation and so on around ArriveCAN. But now we're getting, 19th or 20th meeting. I've lost track, and members here have become concerned with the scheduling of meetings. So forgive me, I will have questions for you, but it's very important to me that we have some not only clarification on our schedule going forward. We've experienced meetings being called randomly, witnesses being changed, changes in the type of meetings that have occurred. And we have other reports that we need to discuss in this committee, namely around an issue that's very important to the people of my riding, which is around biodiversity. And so, Chair, I want to put on notice the following motion. That given that nature is an integral part of Canadian culture and Canadian identity and provides unmeasurable value to our society, wildfires across Canada are impacting communities, the health of Canadians, and exacerbating the climate and biodiversity crises. Every industry relies on a biodiverse supply of natural resources to function. The world is experiencing an unprecedented biodiversity crisis. There are more than 1 million species facing extinction globally, including 640 at-risk species in Canada. The rapid decline in biodiversity threatens the foundations of our economy, our food security, our health, and our quality of life, and poses serious and irreversible risks to our communities and livelihoods. There is a climate emergency, as declared by this House on June 17, 2019. Nature and climate are intertwined, and you cannot solve one crisis without solving the other. That the committee commits to studying 2022 Report 7, Protecting Aquatic Species at Risk, on June 13, 2023. Report 2, Follow-up on the Recovery of Species at Risk, on June 18, 2023. And Report 2023. Report 3, Discretionary Powers to Protect Species at Risk, on June 20th, 2024. I think that's intended to be 2024, June 18, 2024. I have a copy of the motion to give to the clerk. And with that, I want to proceed to my questions. We haven't heard from Tech Systems yet. Mr. Loshman, can you please tell us how Tech Systems became engaged with the government on the development of ArriveCAN?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening statement, Tech Systems did not have an ArriveCAN contract We bid on and won 2 contracts through an open, fair, and competitive process to provide staff augmentation services to CBSA. We were providing professionals to them, and those professionals worked at the direction of CBSA. CBSA asked us for resources, and they placed them on the ArriveCAN project.
Thank you for that. And indeed, you're a subcontractor in the ArriveCAN contract.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Tech Systems was a prime contractor direct with CBSA.
Thank you very much. Chair, I now move that the committee immediately conduct a study into the flagrant disregard for public funds exercised by Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party of Canada members of Parliament, who expensed their travel costs, hotels, and per diems to travel to Quebec City for the Conservative Party of Canada partisan convention in September 2023, as a matter of the public interest and report its findings to the House. Chair, I have discussed this motion in a previous meeting. We didn't get to conclude on that, to debate further on that, but I think that it behooves this committee, being the Public Accounts Committee, to investigate the abuse of taxpayer funds, as we have seen by the Conservative Party of Canada. It's a matter of utmost importance that members here all conduct themselves in the way that they expect contractors and subcontractors to conduct themselves with the use of public funds. So, Chair, you'll recall that I spoke about what some third parties had to say about this report that was in the media a couple of weeks ago.
Just, Mr. Cheney, you're moving to resume debate, is that right, on this motion?
I am moving this motion,
Right.
yes.
I'm ruling this motion out of order for this committee. This committee has, for two, well, this is a matter for Procedure and House Affairs or the Board of Internal Economy. So on that, you are out of time. I'm going to begin
Chair?
our next.
I challenge your ruling.
Point of order.
Yes.
Point of order before the ruling.
Well, the chair has been challenged, and I think I have to go directly to the vote on that. So,
Can't we just vote on the motion and dispose of it so we can get back to this business?
well, I already have a speakers list on this motion, so it won't be a snap vote, Mr. Desjardins. So we do a subcommittee meeting on Monday. We can bring it up then, but chair has been challenged. Mr. Clerk, could you call the roll call on that, please?
Sorry, point of order. What is the vote on exactly? Is the vote on the challenge?
Yes, the clerk will explain. It's probably sure restate it, but the Ms. Killiard has challenged my ruling, which, if you vote to affirm my decision, we continue with the witnesses. If you vote against my ruling, we will turn to the motion, and I'm sure debate that for the remainder of the committee. Is that right, Mr. Clerk? At least on the results. So yes.
So the option to just vote on it, dispose of it, and get back to the meeting isn't possible. That would be my preference.
Then you would want to vote to affirm my decision.
I understand.
Well, is it not? Pardon me. Sorry. Sorry. I'll turn it over to the clerk then. Sorry.
So the vote is on shall the chair's ruling be sustained, which is to say, shall the chair's ruling be upheld? If the chair's ruling is upheld, the motion would be admissible and be allowed to be moved. So shall the
that's not right. If my ruling is upheld, if my ruling is upheld, we get back to the meeting and the motion can be yes.
If the ruling is overturned,
for clarity, Chair, the motion would then no longer be able to come to this committee. Is that correct? That was your ruling? if my understanding is correct.
The clerk said an identical motion could not be moved again.
Point of order.
Yes.
Is it possible by unanimous consent to just deal with the vote or deal with the motion that was presented by Ms. Shanahan, deal with it right now, dispose of it, and then get back to the meeting that we're having right now?
So
we can't.
So
is it that
no,
we can't do that.
Mr. Dijja, there. No, that will. I can tell from my speaking list on the that will not happen.
I see.
Over to you, clerk, for the roll call, please.
So the chair's ruling is that the motion is inadmissible. Shall the chair's ruling be sustained, which is to say, shall the chair's ruling be upheld? Ms. Bradford.
No, I oppose the ruling of the chair.
Mr. Weiler. Was I wrong?
No, that's correct. I want to oppose the ruling.
Ms. Killid. No. Ms. Shanahan.
No.
Ms. Yip.
No.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Brock.
Yes.
Mr. Barrett.
Yay.
Madame Sinclair-Designy.
Oui.
Mr. Descharlet.
Yes.
Thank you. Beginning our third round, Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Sorry, point of order. Sorry,
Yes.
my colleague. I apologize to my colleague. Just in terms of the time operation now, is it possible? Will our time be recovered, or will the last round of our questions be eliminated?
It is my intention, Mr. Dijja, to recover your time. We are beginning the third round. I plan to do 3 and 4, so you will have 2 more slots subject to the willingness of the committee. Okay?
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Nader, you have 5.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you for ensuring that members get their time despite the obvious obstructionary tactics by the Liberal National Caucus Chair. But nonetheless, thank you, Chair, and through you, thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Bashir, Mr. Tano suggested to you or indicated to you to submit 2 proposals, one through GC Strategies and one directly to CBSA. Is that correct? Am I interpreting that correctly?
Thank you for the question. Just a small clarification. It was the same proposal. So we initially was requested to submit it to Mr. Utano, which we did. Subsequently met with Mr. Utano to discuss the details of it. And it was at that subsequent meeting where he said, I'd like you to send a copy of this to Mr. Firth at GC Strategies.
So it was the exact same proposal for the exact same amounts in both submissions?
That's correct. It was the same. It was a PowerPoint presentation to be specific, but it was the exact same presentation. Yes.
Could you remind the committee what was the dollar figure attached to that submission?
Thank you for the question. I recall it was 2 separate. So it's going to be a little long-winded, but I apologize. It was originally going to be 2 separate task authorizations. The first being more of a technical control review. That was in the amount of $255,000. And the second half, the second task authorization was more procedural in nature, reviewing policies, procedures of the sort, and that was for $145,000 for a grand total of $400,000.
And did you in fact receive $400,000 from GC Strategies for your work?
From GC Strategies, yes, that is correct.
And you would have expected to receive a similar amount or the exact same amount had you dealt directly with the CBSA?
That is correct.
So by going through GC Strategies, you still got paid the same amount, but taxpayers in the great scheme of things paid more. Is that a good assumption?
That is my understanding of what happened, yes.
Okay. You talked about meeting with Mr. Firth 2 to 3 times while you were at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat as a senior government official, as a Director General. But you made the comment that they were like any other vendor. In response to another question, you said that there was an element of understanding where the industry was heading. My question to you, though, is were you aware that GC Strategies actually doesn't do any IT work? Were you aware of that at the time?
Thanks for the question. I did not know the nature of GC Strategies business, in great depth. What I did know about them, and to give Mr. Firth credit, he thoroughly read a recent IT strategy we had posted in 2017, 2018, and responded or sent an email, which obviously I had a public email address at the time, sent an email saying that he had some suggestions on how I might be able to achieve some of those strategic objectives. And so I didn't do any research in the company. I took the meeting as I would of any other vendor who would come up with a good idea to investigate further.
So he flim-flammed you. He made you. He flim-flammed you. He made you think that they were a reputable IT company when really they were two guys who were operating a business. He was able to write you a nice email, compliment you on some strategies, and convince you that they were actually a reputable company like any other when really they weren't. Is that a good assumption?
Yeah, I don't know the term that you use there, but what I would suggest is he brought two valid products to the table. Two secure, one was secure communications, as I mentioned. One was digital identity. When I looked up those products, they're legitimate products that he had aligned himself with. So, kudos to him for finding the right products out there.
I guess kudos for him for pulling the wool over a lot of people's eyes over a number of years and making himself quite wealthy off of it. But I want to go briefly to the risk management process that you spoke of within KPMG. Are there two questions? First of all, are there records of that process, and would you be willing to share that information with this committee? That's the first question.
Thank you for the question. We have records of all of these processes, and I'll take that back to the team to see what can be shared.
Okay, I look forward to hopefully seeing that. Second is, what information did you provide to that process within KPMG of your past interactions with GC Strategies? Were they aware that you had personally met with them on at least 2, maybe 3 occasions as a senior official with the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat?
Thanks for the question. I don't recall that being one of the fields that I talked about earlier that had to be filled out regarding personal meetings with the organization. The process is more about testing the legitimacy of the organization. It's I think we look for any public knowledge of lawsuits or things of that nature, and nothing came up at that time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nader. Yep, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be asking each one of the companies the next 2 questions. Were either of your companies involved in creating the terms of contracts you were awarded? Mr. Bashir?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay. No? And? Okay. Were security clearances a prerequisite to receiving a contract to work on ArriveCAN? Were they acquired before the work began? Mr. Bashir?
Thanks for clarifying, and thank you for the question. So in my particular case, security clearances were certainly a requirement given the security nature of the work we were performing. And I can assure you that every member of my team had the requisite security clearance based on the role they had. And to clarify that statement is that those that were issued, a couple of members of my team were required to have in-depth access, as you can imagine, to CBSA systems, and they required secret clearances, and other members of my team required reliability clearances. But all folks involved had the requisite clearance, yes.
Yes, we had the appropriate corporate security clearance as well as our consultants. We have a team that is responsible for making sure that's all in place on any contract. So yes, we had all the security clearances.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We review all RFPs and contracts and to validate that we meet the security requirements, and we met the security requirements for our CBSA contracts.
And that was acquired before the work began. Is that right?
Thank you for the question. We hold a security clearance as a company, and we validate the security clearance of the individuals that we place with the Government of Canada.
Okay. Mr. Bashir, have you ever met Darren Anthony?
Thank you for the question. No, I've never met Mr. Anthony.
Okay. Mr. Bernard and Mr. Dodell, I'm sorry. Did you have any meetings related to ArriveCAN with officials outside of a normal office setting? Have you, Was KPMG involved in conversations around developing the non-competitive contract between GC Strategies and CBSA? Have you spoken to anyone else looking into this issue, like the Auditor General?
Me personally, no, I have not. I don't know, Lydia.
If I can clarify thank you for the member's question. So the Auditor General did contact KPMG to confirm the information that was about to go out in the report ahead of time, just before the report was released, to confirm the details, and we complied with her request.
Mr. Bashir, in your opening statement, you mentioned that KMP serves and assists clients with respect to gaps. And do you feel that that was done?
If I understand the question correctly, I believe you might have been referring to my statement about closing strategic and operational gaps. Was that the reference?
I couldn't remember the exact wording, but I wanted to hear more about that with respect to the work that you were contracted to do.
Absolutely, thank you. And through the chair, I'll answer that in that, specifically in my field of cybersecurity, a lot of our work ends up being gap analysis type work, which means, assessing security posture of systems, today, assessing where they need to be, and providing roadmaps on how to get to a state to best protect the information that is being held by the organization. So by closing operational gaps, that's the reference, certainly in respect to the engagement that I worked on, but I'll pass it to Ms. Lee if there's anything that you want to add for yours.
Just as I had said before, the last time we were here, the work that we did on the Public Health Agency ArriveCAN program was really on helping the Public Health Agency understand policy directions that they might need to take or change or evolve with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we reached out to our global colleagues to provide global leading practices on what other 5I or other jurisdictions were doing in order to help inform those policy directions. So that was the nature of the type of support that we were providing.
That is your time, Ms. Yip. Yes, thank you very much. Up next is Madame Secrétaire Desgagnés pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Bashir, now that you've read the Auditor General's report and you've heard the various testimonies, and you know that Mr. Firth is under investigation by the RCMP, and now that if you had known all that, would you have proceeded with your work with him?
Thanks for the question. I think the first thing to state is we had CBSA asking us to help them augment the security of a system that stored personal information for Canadians, and that is squarely in our wheelhouse, and I'm proud to have done that work and would do that particular work again for any government agency. With respect to the question about GC strategies, and as I stated earlier, today, if we were to go through that risk management process again, I would strongly suspect that flags would be raised and we would not proceed with the engagement through GC strategies. But I don't want to take away from the fact that the work itself, we still believe, and I'm proud to say, was useful.
Merci. C'est pas l'objet de la question.
Thank you. But personally, what do you find unusual or the red flags that might have been raised, and now that you're aware of what you know now, what do you find as being not ethical in what you did, and could you not have done more with regard to ethics if you had known what you know now?
Thank you for the question. When it comes to procurement, we have to follow the direction of the agency that is conducting the procurement. And so, which is what we did at the time, and which is what we would do going forward, and rely on our processes afterwards to dictate whether or not it is acceptable for our firm to go forward with the work.
À vous entendre, on dirait que les...
When I listen to you, I would think that the partners and the those involved, they are not able to see black and white based on what they have in the system. But I assume that if you're a partner at KPMG, you have the duty and also the ability to defend your approach, and when you have different information or different ways of acting. And if you see a danger, a risk, a professional risk for KPMG, you would have preferred not to be here today, of course. But would you have proceeded differently? But you, as an individual who is supposed to be intelligent, are you capable of doing this now?
Thank you for the member's question. I think, going forward, I think we continue to work together as a partner group and make sure we assess risks of all engagements to the best degree that we can with the information we have at the time. I would point again that when conducting this risk assessment in October of 21, with the information available at the time, I believe I stand by the decision we made to proceed at that given time. Given the new information that has come to light since then, I would suspect our decision would be different.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, you're up again for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bashir, when did you first meet with Christian Firth as a public servant?
Thank you for the question. I have an exact date for you. I can give you a rough guess of sometime in the years of 2017, 2018.
Are you not required to document when you meet with potential partners like this that are outside in the public or outside in the private service?
I think the level of documentation varies depending on the nature of the meeting. Like, a half-hour meeting with a vendor.
You said you met in the lobby of a government building. Did you report that?
That's correct. At the time, my management knew I was meeting with Christian Firth, yes.
And how did you report that to management?
I generally debriefed my leadership team on all vendor meetings, and did
you write it down?
I don't recall. It could have been an email. I don't have access to my email.
So you don't recall, you don't know when, but you know you met with them.
Yeah, like to the best of my knowledge, I don't have access to my old emails. But, generally, if I could speak generally.
Who did you report it to? Your leadership team. Who are the members of your leadership team? Who was your supervisor?
At that particular time, it probably would have been, I've worked for a number of different, 2017, 2018, if memory serves, it would have been Mark Briard.
Is that when you met with Christian Firth? Was 2017, 2018, or when did you meet with Christian Firth?
That's to the best of my recollection is 2017, 2018. And the reason I say that.
You don't know the whole year?
Well, the reason I say that.
You have to know at least a month.
Yeah, and if you can allow me to answer, I know it was in relation to when we released our digital operations strategic plan. So in my head, I remember writing that in 2017. I just don't recall when it was published. And Mr. Firth would have contacted me after the publication of that digital operations strategic plan.
So we're supposed to just believe you, Mr. Bashir, that sometime between the course of 2017, 2018, you met with Christian Firth in a government precinct and you failed to disclose in writing, and and your mind seems to have failed you as well, even a month that you met with Christian Firth. Is that correct? Is that what you're telling us?
Well, thank you for the question. Respectfully, you're asking me about a meeting 7 years ago that I'm doing my best to recall. If the Treasury Board of Canada Secretary likely has access to my calendar, and I suggest that might be the fastest way to get the exact meeting invite.
I find it very difficult to believe that sometime in the 2 years of 2017, 2018, that it escapes your knowledge as to when you met with this person, and the fact that you failed to disclose it. Again, I'll ask you one more time. Did you disclose your meeting with Mr. Firth to anyone in writing?
Thank you for the member's question. So generally what would happen after those types of meetings is I would debrief my management team.
Yes or no, Mr. Bashir? It's an easy question.
Debriefs could occur in writing or in person for this particular meeting.
That is the time, Mr. Desjardins. You will have another slot. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Bashir, when you worked at the Treasury Board, you went to this large Canadian company and accounting firm. But when you were with the Treasury Board, how many times did you hear stories of companies like KPMG being sent to work through to subcontract through two-person, no value-add firms? Because it's extraordinary. And I've talked to, at these tables, a lot of folks, and the two-person scenario is an outlier. So how many times did you hear about that?
Thanks for the question. I don't know the number of employees of every company for sure, but I would say it wasn't uncommon to see subcontracting relationships between companies of all sizes.
I mean, you met with 50% of the employees from this company in a government lobby. You mentioned that much. We know that they even were able to write their own contract. There seems to be all kinds of exceptions around this two-person company, GC Strategies. How many times has KPMG, to your knowledge, been allowed to write a contract and then be the beneficiary of that contract, to be the supplier?
I'm not aware of any times we write our own contracts. It's strictly forbidden.
It's forbidden, but it seems like, again, there's these exceptions with GC Strategies. Did you were a DG, you were Director General?
Correct.
Did you do a quick search to see if the individual you were meeting with, Mr. Firth, was registered to lobby before you met with him?
Thank you for the question. I don't recall the details of that meeting. I couldn't give you an exact answer.
Well, were you in the habit of meeting with lobbyists?
Thank you for the question. No, we're not permitted to meet with lobbyists.
Okay, so how do you, if you didn't check to see if he was a lobbyist, how would you know whether or not you were meeting with someone you were allowed to meet with?
Thanks for the question. I'm saying me personally, I don't know. My staff may have checked on my behalf as well.
I've got to tell you, absent more of the details, it just seems like you have a bit of a soft spot for Mr. Firth, and I don't know how he was able to get this access to you. I don't understand how you would be directed on behalf of KPMG to subcontract for this same guy who got this access to you, who was lobbying as an unregistered lobbyist. And your paths seem to cross, and you say, well, it kind of all worked out, and it seems like it was okay. I think it's demonstrably not okay. This company has been engaged in all kinds of conduct that's not acceptable for any other vendor, and it's obviously not of value to Canadians the way that this was carried out. How many hours of programming or cybersecurity work did Christian Firth and GC Strategies do on the contract with KPMG for ArriveCAN? Just how many hours?
On my specific contract, they were not involved on my delivery.
So they weren't involved?
In my delivery, I cannot speak to what Mr. Utano and Mr. Firth did afterwards, but specific to delivery of...
I gather that they probably went out for a steak and a beer. That seems to be the pattern here, is that they went out for dinners, collected 30% commissions, and then had someone else do the work and said, well, these guys are IT professionals, but they didn't do any IT work. How much exactly was KPMG paid through their subcontract with GC Strategies for the work on ArriveCAN?
Thank you for the question. As I stated earlier, the two task authorizations total an amount of $400,000.
Do you know how much GC Strategies billed for that work?
I do not have visibility into that.
Well, we know that GC Strategies billed the government $452,000 for your work, and that's on the low end, which is a pretty good payday, $52,000 for doing no value-added work, and a senior government official facilitated it all. We know that you had that exploratory meeting with GC Strategies, Mr. Firth, and then were directed to work with GC Strategies. At what point did you leave the government to go become a consultant for KPMG or an employee of KPMG? What was the...
That happened in May of 2020.
May of 2020. Do you think it was appropriate and ethical for the government to have a senior CBSA official direct a business to work with a favored contractor, and I'm asserting that they're a favored contractor, like GC Strategies? Do you think it was appropriate and ethical?
I think the government of Canada can decide the way in which...
I'm asking you, sir, make a value judgment. On behalf of KPMG, is this the kind of company that KPMG does business with?
We would do business with any company that...
Do business with any company that's having their doors kicked in by the RCMP, that's obviously engaged in procurement processes that are illegal.
Very much. I will allow an answer, Mr. Barrett.
Do business with any company.
I'd like to complete the sentence. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to say, we would do business with any company that passes our risk management processes, as GC Strategies did at that time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bernard, in response to an earlier question from MP Khalid, you indicated that you were surprised to see your company listed in the AG's report. So given that you made $3 million on contract work with ArriveCAN, why were you surprised that your company would be listed in the AG's report?
Well, first, we had no ArriveCAN contracts. We had a call-up with the CBSA. It was a vehicle, and that vehicle was used. And I know the Auditor General says $3 million, so we immediately went and looked through all of our timesheets, and we were only able to identify 500,000.
Clarify for me a vehicle. So did you not do work on the ArriveCAN app, or clarify what your work was?
In the federal government procurement, vehicles are brought up so that we have a number of vehicles. We all do. And I can talk to you from my side because I was also in the government and I had vehicles, because oftentimes we needed to do some IT work and it had to be done right away. And we didn't have the resources, so we'd go to these vehicles. We have such vehicles. We all do. And those vehicles, we had 3 of them. One of them was never used at all. And in 2 of them that were used, we identified at least $500,000 through the timesheets.
So now I would like to hear from each one of the companies represented here today. The CBSA indicated that contractors were selected because they helped to produce a faster result, that build the app faster. Do you agree that Donnacona, Tech Systems, and KPMG helped to speed up the process? And from each of you, how? How did your involvement or participation do that? Who wants to start? It doesn't matter to me.
Thank you for the member's question. Just to clarify, our work at KPMG was a cybersecurity assessment post development of the application itself. So I can't really comment on how it sped up the development of the app. I can comment on the fact that we did help identify areas for improvement to enhance the security of the application for the benefit of Canadian citizens that used it.
As we previously mentioned, we think from the timesheets, the work that was done, and our team was building infrastructure on the AWS cloud to accept data and provide business intelligence reports back. But it was not only from public health, but with many other applications that were providing data into this infrastructure. So we were building this infrastructure on the AWS cloud. I don't know if it helped speed up the app. I have no idea, but we were creating the infrastructure for a number of different applications.
We're not talking about speeding up the app. We're talking about speeding up the process of developing the app.
You had to build something on the cloud. It's in the cloud, so yeah, it would help.
Okay, and Mr. Loshman, how about your company?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned in our opening statement, we bid on and won 2 contracts with CBSA that went through a competitive process in which we were selected because of our value to the Crown. So yes, I think we delivered value to CBSA.
Now, for each one of the companies, is there any new information or anything else that you would like to add or clarify during your testimony today? Because we'll be wrapping up soon. So is there anything that...
I guess I would just say that we've already said it, that all of our contracts are competitively procured through the RFP process. There was no sole source or anything, and they were all the RFP process, and we were successful in winning them through a very, very competitive process. These processes are very competitive.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Lee?
Thank you for the member's question. I just want to add that on behalf of KPMG, we're really proud of the work that we did to support both the Public Health Agency of Canada and CBSA during the COVID-19 pandemic with at the time, circumstances that for both agencies were incredibly stressful, and at all times we followed the government's preferred procurement process, and we did not influence that procurement process. We abided by it at their request. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, and how much time do I have left?
About 20 seconds.
Okay, did you have anything that you would like to add?
The question, no additional clarifications at this time.
Okay, I'll see. Bye.
Thank you very much. Beginning our 4th and final round, Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Bashir, I'm still going to be circling back on your relationship with GC Strategies and Christian Firth. Your evidence is somewhat clear, 3 to 4 possible meetings with Mr. Firth before you engaged with him pursuant to direction given by Mr. Utano. Did any of those meetings occur at his place of business?
No, sir, they did not.
Okay. All at the government offices?
All in the lobby of 90 Elgin, from what I recall, yes.
Were you familiar with where he conducted his business?
I did not have any line of sight into that.
He probably didn't tell you he operated out of his basement, did he?
I did not have any line of sight into that either.
No, he didn't offer that.
That's correct.
Didn't tell you where he worked out of? Did he give you a business card at least?
It's possible. I don't recall, but I don't recall the basement conversation coming up.
Okay, so help me with this because I have a hard time reconciling the evidence that your partner, Mr. Hartaj Najir, gave on the last occasion and your evidence today with respect to a very key issue. And my colleague, Mr. Nader, had basically used a phrase called flim-flammed. You weren't familiar with that phrase. It could be hoodwinked. It could be snowed. It could be lied to. You certainly didn't know, is what I understand, you didn't know that they offered no IT services whatsoever. They were strictly a middleman, connecting the government of Canada with professionals. You're saying you didn't know that, and Mr. Firth didn't volunteer that information. That's what you're telling us today, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so here's the problem. Your partner, Mr. Najir, on the last occasion at committee said the following. The firm, KPMG, followed rigorous processes and determined no adverse considerations in contracting with GC Strategies, given that they were a well-known entity in the government sector. Both versions cannot be true at the same time. What were those rigorous processes that determined there were no adverse considerations? Did you at least do an address check?
Thank you for the question. I don't know the detail, and I'll ask Ms. Lee after this to provide whatever details you can about our acceptance processes as that is executed by another team. But my understanding is that they look into a variety of factors, including the board of directors or C-suite, any kind of
No board of directors. It was a partnership. It wasn't a corporation. So let's move on to the other checks.
Thank you. My understanding is they look for, any public lawsuits or adverse media attention, things of that nature. But Ms. Lee, please, if I'm missing anything in our...
That's right. That's correct.
And at that given time, given that these are, point in time assessments, nothing of concern was raised.
A leading multinational consulting firm exercises the bare minimum of due diligence to determine that you are legitimately dealing with an IT company that lied to you. Don't you recognize the problems inherent with what you just stated to me? Don't you think you need to revamp your investigative measures to determine who you're actually dealing with?
Thank you for the member's question, and if I may, Mr. Chair, I just want to comment on the testimony from Hartaj last time we were here. He was referring to the client engagement and the engagement acceptance process that we go through for every single project that we do, which is and if I may,
Ms. Lee, that's fine. This is my time. I have some other questions to ask of you. So, Mr. Utano asked you to deal specifically with GC Strategies in the virtual meeting that you had with him, correct? Okay. Did he say why?
At that time, my understanding was that he was exploring a variety of procurement options as likely direct.
He didn't give you any other government, he didn't give you any other companies to deal with. He didn't say you can deal with GC or you can deal with Dalian or you can deal with Coridex. You choose. He just said, I want you to work with GC, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So at the time, we were exploring either, like I said, going out to RFP, full RFP, using the SEPS vehicle, or GC Strategies were the three options.
And that's the first time that you had ever working with the government of Canada, you had ever worked with a contractor that wasn't directly the government of Canada. Isn't that fair to say?
Me personally, that was my first time, but as our written response stated, our firm has subcontracted in the past with approximately 13 companies.
Thank you. That is your time. There's turning now to Ms. Shanahan. For 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. And again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing here today. And I regret the accusatory nature of some of the questions that you have been subjected to here today. And I also apologize for you having been subjected to some of some housekeeping that I did earlier, but I firmly believe that members of Parliament should be held to the same standard that they expect contractors, that they expect employees, that they expect the public to be held to, that have dealings with taxpayer money, and so that was the nature of my interventions earlier, but we can see that that was shut down for today, but may be revisited at another time. In the meantime, I would like to ask you about the Auditor General's report. So were you, and I think someone did answer this, were you contacted by the Auditor General's office during the writing of the report, Ms. Lee?
Yes, thank you for the member's question. We were, so KPMG was contacted, I think a week in advance of the publication of the Auditor's General report to just to confirm some of the facts that were documented in the report. And as I said before, and I'll say it again, we read the report, we understood all the findings, and we cooperated fully.
Very good. So you were able to confirm the facts. So when the report actually was issued, did you learn anything? Was there anything in that report that you were not aware of concerning KPMG?
Thank you for the member's question. The only thing that we learned was when she documented that there was no documentation. I believe it was, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was to the effect of that there was no documentation or rationale provided by the Public Health Agency for the direct award to KPMG after the original SEPS contracting. And to our understanding, the Public Health Agency did actually speak with their internal procurement folks to provide that rationale. We were not given access to any of that documentation or were part of any of those conversations. But that was the only thing that stood out for us that was different than what we understood to have happened.
Okay, so you were not contacted after the report came out about any follow-up or providing any additional...
We were not, and that's correct.
...documents. All right, and so the same question then to Donnacona, Mr. Dadal. Were you contacted by the Auditor General's report prior to the report coming out?
Yes, prior to the release of the report, we received a very brief email stating that they were going to, the report would show that we did $3 million of services work on ArriveCAN. We responded back after we had gone through our timesheets and said, from our records, we believe that number is probably in the range of 500,000. And we reported that back, and we didn't hear anything after that. And we had no other contact after that with the AG.
So once the report was released, is that when you learned that the 3 million numbers was still there?
Yes.
Yes. All
yes.
Right. And have you had any contact now subsequent?
No, none.
All right. Thank you very much. And Mr. Lashman for...
Thank you for the question. Yes, we were contacted by the Auditor General prior to the release of the report. We cooperated with her investigation and have not heard back from the office since.
Was there anything in the report that that was new to you that you learned once the report was published?
Thank you for the question. We've read the report and we agree with what's in the report.
All right, very good. I'm now. Have any of you been contacted by the if you are contacted by the RCMP, will you cooperate with ongoing investigations into the ArriveCAN application?
Thanks for that Member's question, and just to be clear, for the ArriveCAN work that we've done, we have not been contacted by the RCMP, but of course, if we were, we would comply and we would cooperate fully. But we have not been.
Excellent. Same question.
We've not been contacted by the RCMP, and obviously, if we were, we would.
All right. And
cooperate.
same question here.
Thank you for the question. We have not been contacted by the RCMP, but we would cooperate with the investigation.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the work that you did in the public service, and I have no further questions.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés, encore une fois.
Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, two numbers. Mr. Lashman, you were saying that you will cooperate with any study by the RCMP. What do you have to say with regard to the current inquiry? Do you have anything else that you wish to share with us?
Thank you for the question. We haven't been contacted by the RCMP in regards to CBSA or ArriveCAN, so no further comment.
Donc, vous n'avez absolument rien.
So you have nothing from your experience with them? There's nothing else. We've heard references to systemic corruption within CBSA. So you saw nothing with regard to the CBSA?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. No, we have not been contacted by the RCMP.
Parfait. Merci. Je vais passer.
Now, a question for Donnacona. Coming back to the fact that you said that there were accusations and that changed your life, and in 2021, I think that there were 21 non-competitive contracts with CBSA. 23 in 2021, non-competitive by CBSA. How can you explain this such a large number of contracts, non-competitive, 1 year only with one company?
Sorry, who with the non-competitive? We didn't have any non-competitive contracts.
D'après le site du gouvernement même, vous avez reçu 21 contrats de manière non concurrentielle. 20 avec le gouvernement, avec l'agence.
You had this was under the open government's source. Do you confirm that?
Sir, could you repeat the question? My understanding is you're saying we had some 20-odd non-competitive contracts awarded?
C'est les chiffres du gouvernement, Monsieur Dowdall.
These are government figures.
We don't have any non-competitive. We can't validate that information.
D'accord. Donc, vous contestez les chiffres.
So you're questioning the information from the open government site itself. Strange. And you've never had non-competitive contracts with the Government of Canada?
The only ones we would have had would have been possible sole sources under 40,000. That's the only thing we've had. Everything else we've competed in a typical RFP process.
Une dernière question, s'il vous plaît. Ça marche. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
C'est Mr. Desjardins. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Did KPMG employees who worked on ArriveCAN receive a valid security clearance?
The member's question. I'll comment on the public health agency related work. All of the employees who worked, or all of the staff who worked on the ArriveCAN program, yes, for public health agents, we had all the proper security clearance. We required reliability for that contract, for those contracts. And then
at which level did they receive?
So for the public health agency work, we were required to have reliability security clearance, and all of our resources had that reliability or higher. I myself have security at secret clearance.
And if I could kindly, if you don't mind me adding, for the cybersecurity assessment work, just to reiterate what I said earlier, I had a mix of some secret cleared people who were doing more of the hands-on work with the rest of the staff at the reliability level.
Did KPMG at any time share the results of the security vulnerability assessment with GC Strategies?
No.
In any capacity, sharing of reports, potential vulnerabilities found in the assessment, incident response plans, and any information, even if it was meeting in a lobby, Mr. Bashir?
Thank you for the member's question. All of our results were shared directly with the CBSA, but I can't speak to who they shared them with after that.
Now, moving on to intellectual property, does KPMG consider any algorithm it produces for the government, in particular ArriveCAN, their intellectual property?
So thank you for the member's question. I'll just clarify that for the public health agency related work, we did not develop any algorithms for that work.
Similarly, when you say algorithm, I just want to clarify that KPMG didn't create or edit any code for the ArriveCAN app. Our work was more assessment after the code was developed to confirm that the code complied with Government of Canada security standards and policies.
I understand. And the same question regarding security clearances for Tech and Donnacona. Did you receive security clearances? For all those employees that worked on the ArriveCAN app?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we validate the security clearance of all of the professionals we place with the government.
Unless it's very short, Mr.
Donnacona, the security clearance?
Pardon me. The answer to that was also.
Clearances, we would have had security clearances for everybody. Yep.
And thank you. That is your time.
Thank you.
That is your time. Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And it's too bad that the Liberal National Caucus Chair doesn't like our questions, but unfortunately, the government failed, and we have to ask questions on behalf of Canadians so that taxpayer money is properly spent. Mr. Bashir, you mentioned that you would have briefed your leadership team on your meetings with GC Strategies. Who were the members that you would have briefed on those meetings?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, given the time frame, it likely would have been Mark Briard.
So you said leadership team. Was it more than one person or just Mr. Briard?
Well, he was my assistant deputy minister at the time. There were a number of other director generals that may have been present, but generally the debrief would have been back like upwards to the assistant deputy minister, yes.
Would that have been oral brief or would there have been written documentation?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, generally the debriefs, they varied. Sometimes if there was substance, there would be in writing. Sometimes it was a conversation during a bilateral meeting in person.
Well, given that Mr. Brouillard was the Chief Technology Officer of Canada, do you not think he might have had some line of sight onto a company like GC Strategies, which supposedly was a IT technology company?
Thank you for the question. I can't speak to Mr. Briard's line of sight into the companies that he knows.
I'll ask you that then. Did he offer any concerns about GC Strategies?
Thank you for the question. At that time, no concerns were raised.
So Mr. Brouillard was the Chief Technology Officer of Canada. Who currently holds that position?
Thank you for the question. I don't actually. I think last I heard it was Min Doan, but I believe he's on leave of absence, so I'm not sure who is acting in the role at the moment.
Min Doan, that name rings a bell with this committee. Have you ever met with Min Doan?
Thank you for the question. Certainly in government context, we were on the same committee, I believe, the Enterprise Architecture Review Board. So we sat, across the table from one another in a format similar to this, but didn't really work with them too closely.
Did you ever have any conversations with Min Doan after leaving government?
After leaving, thank you for the question. The only time was likely during the presentation of our findings of the CBSA cybersecurity assessment that we conducted. I remember presenting those findings to a CBSA committee, and I believe that Mr. Doan was present at that meeting.
Do you have any records from that meeting?
Thank you for the question. At best, probably a meeting invite. I can't, but I'd have to get back to you on that.
Who else do you recall having been at that meeting with Mr. Doan?
Certainly Mr. Utano would have been present, likely some of his team members as well, and other members. It was a steering committee, as I recall, a CBSA steering committee. So I don't know all the names off the top of my head, but I suggest that it would likely be a series of IT leaders, if I can characterize it that way.
Could you get back to us if you have any documentation of who would have been at that
Certainly,
meeting?
I'll take that back and get back to whatever I can.
Does KPMG, or you specifically in your role, have any dealings with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
Thank you for the question. So first, me personally, no, I've not had any dealings with Department of Fishery and Oceans. I can't speak on behalf of the entire firm. I could, take that back and get back to you. But to my knowledge, I don't know of any. But Ms. Lee, I don't know if.
Same answer. I'm not aware.
Treasury Board Secretariat.
Thank you for that question as well. I recently completed a small engagement with the Office of the Comptroller General in the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, where it was a roughly $30,000 engagement to provide security advice and guidance on a horizontal audit of IT security. That was the last engagement I had signed with the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat.
Did you have any previous dealings with those individuals at the Comptroller General's office while you were a public servant?
Thank you for the question. When it comes to dealings, not like I didn't work with them on a regular basis. I certainly would have passed by them in the hall and said hello, but no, we didn't have any work, regularly. It could be given that I was in the office of the Chief Information Officer, and they were in a completely separate branch.
So I only have a few seconds left, but I want to go back. You mentioned that you would have briefed your employer, your manager, but you don't know how you did it. Could you commit in review to coming back to this committee with a confirmation of how you would have briefed your manager and who you would have briefed, whether it was Mr. Brouillard or whether it was others as well, and any documentation? Can you provide that to this committee of how you briefed your supervisors following your meetings with GC Strategies?
I'll certainly do what I can. I hope the committee understands and respects. I don't have access to my former inbox at Treasury Board, so I couldn't provide the records themselves. But I can certainly do my best to summarize what I recall.
Thank you. If you could do that, and if you're even if you get a response, great. And if you find the department does not allow you access to your records, we will take that into consideration as well. Thank you. Ms. Shipp, you have the last 5-minute round turn. It's over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sorry to hear that Mr. Nader is not interested in looking in the misuse of public funds when it's their own members doing it. Mr. Bernard, how long have you been doing business with the Government of Canada?
Since, you mean after I resigned? Since 1990.
Okay. And how large were these contracts relatively to the work that your organization has normally done?
Well, it started off small and it just grew over time as we grew.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I'll ask the same question to yourself.
Thank you for the question. You're asking, just for clarification.
How long has
Tech Systems
been doing business with the Government of Canada?
Thank you for the question. Tech Systems has been working with the federal government since about 2015. Since 2015, sorry.
And how large were these contracts relative to the work that you normally do?
Thank you for the question. The contracts vary in size, but we have several different contracts with the federal government of multiple values. So some values are, say, $300,000, but we do have our agreements with CBSA, for example, were $15 and $7 million respectively.
Okay. All right. Ms. Lee, did you want to finish your answer? I believe Mr. Brock was asking a question and you weren't given an opportunity to finish your answer. Do you still want to answer that?
Thank you very much for allowing me to finish my comment. I was simply trying to say before, in response to Mr. Brock's question, that that I think it was to do with the processes around how we review whether or not we can engage in work with a particular organization or a contractor or a subcontractor. So I was just trying to simply finish the statement that we do have these processes where we check clients, we check the nature of the engagement that we're being asked to undertake. And we have 3 partners for all of our public sector engagements. We have 3 partners that actually have to sign off on something before we're allowed to proceed. The engagement lead partner a secondary partner that would be responsible for looking after the engagement specific process questions, and then another engagement another quality partner. So I wanted to simply say that our processes are incredibly rigorous. They're very detailed. They are reliant on point in time information, and our systems continuously update based on current information as things evolve. So that's what I wanted to finish. Thank you.
Okay. So do you believe that your company gave good value for the work that was done?
Again, for the member's question, as I said before, we are very proud of the work that we did, both through the Public Health Agency as well as the CBSA work that we fulfilled for the government during this incredibly stressful time during the pandemic. And we do believe that the work that we did fulfilled roles that the government themselves could not do in the time constraints that were required. And so, yes, I do think that we added tremendous value for the work that we provided for the Government of Canada.
Mr. Bashir, looking back on everything that's happened, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Thank you for the question. I echo my colleagues' comments and how proud we are of doing that job. If the CBSA required cybersecurity assistance to ensure the continued protection of Canadians' information, that is right up our alley, and we would do that type of work again. I think going back to what Ms. Lee said, I wouldn't have done anything differently in the sense that we went through the processes we were supposed to go through. The Government of Canada had repeatedly validated GC Strategies themselves as a vendor of choice, of record, and awarded, I believe, 100 plus contracts since 2015. So given that information, no differences to my answer. I think knowing what we know today, and knowing that some adverse information has come up with regards to that company, I don't suspect we do work with them going forward. However, I want to echo again that if a Government of Canada organization required cybersecurity support, we would be there, absolutely.
How much time do
You have about 5 seconds, so a very quick question.
Okay. Anything either of you would do differently?
And that is it. Anything else
Well,
you'd like to add?
Anything else?
No. Thank you.
No. Very good. Thank you. Order, please. I want to thank the witnesses for coming in today. We're ending a little late, but not too bad, and coming in for your testimony and participation in relation to the study of ArriveCAN. Any documents or information that's been requested, you can submit that to the clerk. Members, before we adjourn, the panel schedule for Thursday will be switched. We can expect Minister Haidoo for the first hour and Minister Blair in the second hour. This is at their request, and I am inclined to grant that change. And lastly, the subcommittee will be meeting Monday at 3:30 p.m. for an in-camera discussion. On that, I adjourn this meeting. Have a good weekend. See some of you Monday.